Hey, welcome back to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. The gang is back together after spring break off. We're here to discuss Penn State football, which is still somehow a week away from spring practice. I don't know. We had this conversation on the BWI message board on Friday during our Friday chat, which you should definitely check out, where we kind of just talk to members on the site. You get to ask any question you want. We try to provide the best information possible, which is what Blue White Illustrated does. Fitz and Nate do a great job of giving you the best information possible. But somebody just asked, is this feel like this offseason is dragging on? And Nate, Fitz, how do you feel about that to start the show? Because we still have a week of preview before we actually get the rubber on the road for spring football. So Fitz, welcome back to the show. Hope your trip was great. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, you look at different things like site traffic, analytics, and all that kind of stuff, and everybody was gung-ho in January. Absolutely. And I get it. You know, it went a little bit different than usual. Usually we have that, you know, that December lull where you get done the season and then all of a sudden, you know, signing days in 3 weeks, and then you can ramp yourself up quickly for that. But you didn't get that this year because signing day was early. And then the third week of December was a playoff game. So you got that, another playoff game, and you know, it's probably hell on the wallet for some people that wanted to travel to all these things. So yeah, there's a little bit of fatigue that has set in. I think I noticed it probably the weekend after the final junior day. So February 1st was the final junior day. They went to a dead period all of February, and you kind of saw people sort of exhale collectively there. And I think that's what we've gotten. I mean, we appreciate people watching. Like the show numbers are great. The you know, the downloads, all that kind of stuff. People are reading. It's just like people catching their breath for a month and a half, something like that. And then you get back from spring break, and typically it's like, hey, let's get rolling again. And then all of a sudden there's another week till spring practice, and we can't wait for spring practice because it gives us something more to talk about. But yeah, it's just been a wonky off season. It's all part of the new scheduling with the college football playoff. Also think it's intriguing. The Penn State's blue-white game is late this year, and it takes place after the portal window closes. So that's an interesting wrinkle there. Nate, we kind of hyper theorized about this last week, but yeah, I think it's a strategic. I think there's some strategery going into
that. Nate, welcome back as well.
Hi.
What you haven't had as much of a downtime as us, because you know your coverage of Penn State basketball, and of course all the off-field things, you know, that you were the primary lead reporter on in terms of naming rights for stadiums and NIL and all of those things, front office stuff. So you've been busy this whole time. But what's your view on kind of where we sit here a week out from spring football? I agree with what Fitz said. It's been the new normal is not normal yet in terms of the off season. How's it been for you?
I think it's been just fine, honestly. And look, there were some coaching changes in there. I thought that the Jim Knowles thing, you know, that was a 2-week process.
That was great.
Longer than 2 weeks. That had some fun. We had some fun. We had some. Yeah. I look back fondly on our memories. We all laughed. We cried. Right. There was a running back coach's change. Right. Jaywan Sider off to Notre Dame. Like, things have happened. So I have felt professionally fulfilled, I would say, in the 3-month gap between the end of or 2-month gap, I should say, between the end of the season and now. And look, like there is, I did think of all the stuff that Chuck Losey talked about a couple of weeks ago when he met with reporters. The one thing that I thought was interesting, and there were many things that were interesting, but talking about trying to condense 7-ish weeks of normal winter workouts into 4, and how basically spring break, before spring break, because they took 2 weeks off to get their bodies right? Like, just, you have this dual effect of you're actually playing more games by 3 in this case, right? 3 more games than you normally would. So your body has that toll, but also those games, the timing of those games pushes so far into the new year, as opposed to previously, that you have to account for that. There has to be some way to make up for that. So, but on the backside of spring break, it's business as usual. And so spring break happened, and now it's business as usual. They're going to have this week, and then they're going to get into spring practice next week.
I actually really enjoyed that conversation because it's something that I've been kind of talking about for a couple of years on the site, which is, I don't think people understand why February and January are so important to the football development cycle, where really the ability to be better at football from a physical standpoint, a lot of that happens in January and February. And, I went into the very broad idea of the sports science of why and how lifting works. And that narrower window, I'm fascinated to see how they adapt to that, because as you talked about, this is one of, if not the best strength staff in the country. So if there is going to be somebody who adapts to that quickly, it'll be Chuck Losey and his staff. But there is a rhythm to this that was disrupted. And I think that anytime you have a rhythm that's disrupted in these things, it is absolutely, there's absolutely a ripple effect that, you probably don't have the awareness that it's going to change as many things as you think.
In a bad way.
Yes.
Right? Like that. Obviously Penn State is going to feel optimistic coming off of the season that it just had, but there are consequences to that success. And to me, that's like super fascinating, because you're already under normal circumstances, right? Which are out the window, but under normal circumstances, your season ends at the end of November. And yeah, you have bowl prep. That's when you're getting your bodies right? That's the period where all of the bumps and bruises, all the stuff that needs time to heal up, so that you go into January with a clean slate, with a relatively fresh, clean bill of health. That all got pushed off by like 6 weeks.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like that's a significant difference from standard protocol. So yeah,
and that sets us up. That sets us up perfectly for what we're talking about today, because James Franklin, Chuck Losey, both those guys have talked about some modifications in the offseason for especially veterans who carried the load during what was essentially an NFL season length of 16 games. And I know they play 17 now, but we're just going to use that as a quick transition of the idea of that. So with injured players who are coming off whatever corrections they had in the offseason via surgery or rest, and then veterans moving on to the NFL and natural vacancies, all those things put together, who are the young players that have the most to gain and will we learn the most about in spring football? That is what we're talking about today on the show. That is the feature of what we're talking about. Of course, we'll get to Fitz's recruiting updates. We will get to some other news and notes, and in the BWI mailbag to end the show. Fitz, what's making you smile here? What's going on?
Nate's last comment. Nobody knows the impact of not lifting more than him. I don't know. I got a notification Sunday night at about 11 o'clock that you just got off the Peloton. So like you're doing the workout. You had to get your streak extended or something. Maybe that was Saturday night. I don't know. No, it's interesting you mentioned how the practice dynamic changes, because usually when you finish the season, you get your guys that are going to play in the bowl game. You get them the rest that they need, the lack of reps that they need to rest up and get ready for the bowl game. And the younger players step forward in bowl practice. And it's always intriguing to see who sort of pops there. This year, you've got game prep. Like, it's all game prep. You're staying on, if you're on the scout team, you're staying on the scout team. Maybe you get a couple extra here and there because you've got 3 weeks of practice leading up to SMU. But it's just going to be different feedback, and it's going to be different experiences. Now, it's a great experience for the guys that came in January that got a chance to be with the team and travel with the team and see all that stuff and see firsthand how practice is run. But at the same time, all that prep goes into Nick Singleton and Katron Allen rather than Corey Smith and Quentin Martin, who would have taken over in a regular bowl prep. So I think that's just an interesting dynamic that goes into this. And it's going to bleed over into the spring when you're talking about getting those guys that you need to be as healthy as possible in August, taking a step back. So wrapping Nick and Katron in bubble wrap, and Zane Durant and Nittany and all these guys that have been around the block a time or two, even though they're learning a new defense, just keeping them as healthy as possible and getting these younger guys to step up.
Yeah, Nate, you just gave us a perfect transition talking about getting Drew Aller through spring football healthy, which there is this. You and I had a conversation this week about how underrated it is that he's returning to the program for his senior season. You wrote about that. I wrote about that. But recently you wrote about that in your spring outlook series, talking about each position. And the last one was quarterback. So what was your process in writing these, which of course you can go and read at bluewhiteillustrated.com. For just $1, sign up, get that information, get that perspective from Nate. We're going to talk about it high level. We're not getting to all the positions he's previewed. But what were you thinking about when you were writing these spring previews?
What was my process? Getting it done. There's like 2,000 words of all the things that are rattling around in my brain from this past season and contextualizing.
That's not just one article.
No, that is each article. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you and I are on the same wavelength. We're on the same word vomit train. No, look, I do think that the opportunity and maybe a benefit of this, prolonged duration between the end of the season and the start of spring practice is it does give you an opportunity to see how the dust has settled and to kind of recalibrate, right? What does this look like? What Beau Pribula, right, who seems like ages ago transferred, was the sure thing backup quarterback. I don't know that they know who the backup quarterback is for next season. And nobody loves talking about a backup quarterback more than everyone on earth. So the reality is, Drew Aller, there is no mystery, obviously, about who Penn State's starting quarterback is for the next season. But there is, I think, some mystery and some opportunity for the guys that are still in that room to vie for playing time and to vie for that position. Not only that position, but
quarterback of the future. Are we starting that conversation this spring?
My more immediate question is not quarterback of the future. It's they have made a conscientious effort to involve Beau, right? Mm-hmm. Are they going to do the same? Do they go out of their way to integrate somebody in the same capacity next season in the same vein, whether it's as an offensive weapon who diversifies the offense or as a, hey, don't transfer, right? Both of those things are in play. How much of an effort does Andy Kotelnicki give to that, to involve a second quarterback this season?
Fitz, what do you think about that? Because I think that's a very fascinating subject, and one that when you're talking about the backup quarterback, Beau Pribula brought a different skill set that the offense needed. I don't see another quarterback on the roster that kind of provides what Beau Pribula provided, but Nate brings up a really good point, Fitz.
Yeah, I think you can get some elements of dual threat out of Grunk and Smolik as well. Smolik obviously, had the injury last year, so I'm curious how he looks in the spring, but they've liked what they've seen in him. You can get some elements of dual threatness, but not really what Beau brought to the table. Beau was a hammer at times, that was the guy that you needed maybe in the red zone or something like that. So I think there's different ways to approach it. Grunk does a lot of great things, and if he is the backup, I just don't see it. I think we talked about this on the show a couple weeks ago. How much did you change the offense, or at least sort of throw a wrench into things of the flow of the offense when you put Beau in? And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
Yeah.
But at the same time, how much can this entire offense benefit from Drew being out there every snap? It's great to change. It's great to throw a change up, but if you can throw a fastball by a guy, it's probably what you're going to lean on. So
also. Sorry, I don't want to get on a rant, and I know that this leads me into a rant area, but the whole package just doesn't make sense with Drew Aller on the field, because the whole point of bringing Beau Pribula onto the field is to run those read option concepts and to get an extra hat in the run game. No one's respecting Drew Aller on those plays. They had a lot of the complaints about the offense being too cute is because they had to involve Drew Aller in those looks, or else you can still just dedicate 11 players to a 10-man play. So if you don't have Beau Pribula, which had that efficient running threat, whether or not he was always great and the best at read option, and sometimes maybe he just decided to keep the ball because he wanted to have the ball in his hands for the play he was on the field. That aside, he was a legitimate running threat. If they'd go with the Tyler Warren package with, say, Luke Reynolds, Fitz, did they just have to take Aller off the field for those plays? I'm struggling with this whole conversation.
Yeah. I don't know that you do in a situation if you're going to make Luke Reynolds the new Tyler Warren, I would keep him on the field because you can see you saw I don't know. It's kind of weird because the threat of Bo Prabula and the threat of Tyler Warren with the ball in their hand were the same, but not, because Tyler Warren was going to bulldoze you and Bo could do so many different things. But there's also a reason that the single wing was really successful for a long time in football, because it's tough to stop from a numbers perspective. And I think that goes into it. And you get the ball out to Drew, and all of a sudden, Tyler or Luke is snapping the ball and different things happen. So I think you keep him out there for that. But I just, there's a conversation in the chat here about Grunk, being faster than Drew. And that's probably true, but he's not a runner. Like he's not like an effective at this level, going to change the game with his feet type guy. He can move around. He can throw on the run. He can do all those things. Absolutely.
Would you say the net result is closer to Drew then, in terms of like, he can run, but he's not a runner. He's kind of he's a quarterback first. And not to say that Bo Prabula couldn't throw the football, but a lot of times when he had the option, he chose to run and not throw.
Yeah, I would say that. And Grunk might have a stronger arm than Drew, which is pretty crazy to think about. But at the same time, you're looking at a quarterback. There's no, hey, let's put Grunk at linebacker or safety and see how this works, because he's such a great athlete. Bo is, I think, kind of on a different level of that. And you kind of saw that all the way through with Bo, from high school to where he got in college. And eventually I think you'll see that at Missouri this year as well. But you kind of don't see that with Grunk, and that's perfectly fine. I don't think you can't try and make him something that he's not.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this tangent that we're on. We got a lot of stuff to get to, including one of our favorite conversations here on the show, which is beer at Anti-Fragile. So you guys are the experts, because I don't make it downtown. I am a hermit that lives out in the woods. So Nate, Anti-Fragile. Yeah. Tell us about Anti-Fragile Brewing in downtown State College.
They have beer. They have beer in downtown State College, and it's great. It's homemade, in fact. On site, on the premises, on East Calder Way. There is plenty of parking. There are great people inside, and most important, there is great beer inside, with a rotating menu that they have up on the televisions there inside Anti-Fragile. There's plenty of space. There's plenty of opportunity to hang out and relax in what I consider the perfect combination of atmosphere and product. Yeah, I love it. I take my family there, right? You can take kids there, at the appropriate hours. And then when it's not appropriate for kids, they just disappear. They're no longer there. And you can have a good time with your adult friends. So Anti-Fragile has been a fantastic partner, sponsor of this show. We appreciate them all the time. And definitely when you go down there, mention that we sent you.
Absolutely. And it's supposed to be nice today. We're getting closer to nicer weather being more of the norm. So you should go check it out. They got that. It's a covered patio now, right? So they actually have the overhang where you can sit there and you can enjoy a beer outside. There's nothing I love in life more than having a drink outside. It's one of my favorite things to do. So, for me, because I can't have beer anymore, which is terrible, you should go check out Anti-Fragile, which is why I'm not the guy who tells you about Anti-Fragile anymore, even though at one time craft beer was my favorite thing on the planet. And Anti-Fragile, like they said, it's good when the menu rotates and they're giving you new things, because it's not just a cookie cutter formula that they have and they mass produce in the back. Small batch, it's all absolutely excellent, great stuff. Speaking of great stuff, we want to give you today's main conversation, which is our spring football standouts. This doesn't mean the best players on the team. This means the players that I think we're going to learn the most about. Like we talked about at the beginning of the show, which are the players that have the opportunity to take a step forward? Because maybe it's Ethan Grunkmeyer with Drew Aller. We're expecting him to have a reduced role this spring. Any of the veterans, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, some of the veterans on the defense. There is that balance of putting the defense in under Jim Knowles and also giving some of those players rest. I just think this time of year is a prime time for us to learn more about some young players and for those players to make a genuine move up or down the roster. So we are going to pick one each. Fitz, of course, does an excellent job of knowing all the things. So he's got a bunch. I don't care, honestly, if we go through all of those. If we don't, that's cool. But Fitz, I will start with you, seeing as you filled out the questionnaire. So on offense, who are the players you're looking at that have that opportunity to take a big step in terms of what we learn about them and take a step forward if they do play well?
Yeah, I've got 10 written down. So kept it nice and concise here. I'm going to start with Egan Boyer. And this is a guy that obviously I've been talking up for a while since before he got on campus. You look at the potential that he's got as a nearly 6'8", probably about 295 pounds, 290 pounds right now, still on the way up. And if you saw him, you would probably think he's still 270 because he looks pretty skinny, but very skilled, very athletic guy. When you look at Penn State's situation at offensive tackle, yes, they've got 3 guys coming back that they feel good about. One of those guys won't be there in the spring with Anthony Donka. You've got Drew Shelton, who has been through multiple springs so far, and Nolan Rucci, who came on at the end of last year. So you feel pretty good about where that position stands overall. If you can get a 4th guy, and that guy can be Egan Boyer, all of a sudden you're flexible everywhere else. T. Frank's going to talk Javen Williams here in a little bit. Does that makes him an available swing guy? That makes you focus JB Nelson on guard, which is his best position. So you've got a lot going. If you can get something out of Egan Boyer, it's going to be a very important spring for him. I do think he's ahead of Garrett Sexton in that class. Yeah, he's very intriguing to me as a guy that's going to need reps, a guy that you can eventually lean on as someone you feel good about getting in there. I remember talking to some folks after Olu's redshirt year. And he said, yeah, he can get in the way of some people right now. He's not where he's going to be. He's not where he needs, I guess he was probably where he needs to be at that point, but he can get in the way of people right now. And then he transitioned into what we eventually saw from Olu Fashanu. And I think there's something to that with Boyer. Like they felt like they probably could have played him last year, but obviously didn't need it. Like, as you know, unfortunately with the Donka injury, you saw more two tackle sets is a terrible way to put it because there's always 2 tackles out there, but you saw all the regulars out there all the time. Yeah. Now all of a sudden you've got more options, and that room, I tell you what, man, Phil Troutwine, since he got here, just building that room, building not only a room with talent, draft picks, all that kind of stuff, but a room with depth. And it seems like a room that guys want to be in. You've got guys like Javen Williams, who have been here a couple of years, Alex Burkmeyer, who have been here a couple of years, who are sticking it out to develop and to eventually play their role. And when we talk about the successes of the best offensive lines in college football in the last couple of years, they're loaded with older players. And that, I think, is where Penn State has gotten and continues to go in that direction. So you can't really say enough about the job that Phil Troutwine has done, but I think he's got another really good one in Egan Boyer, and I can't wait to see him this spring.
One of the things I really liked about Egan Boyer, and I think this speaks to the why he stood out, is in terms of just watching him in kind of cleanup play, he was very confident and executed his assignments really well. Like, he seemed to know what to do and aggressively went and did it, which is that's really good football. But he was not big enough to make an impact in terms of actual, physical impact on the field. If you just give him another offseason of development, I think that's, to me, that's what fits the signaling here of those extra reps and also that added weight and added work in the weight room this offseason. So it's a very exciting thing, which leads me, Fitz, to the point of, does Javen Williams now have that flexibility? I'm still going to give him the option to play tackle this spring, but we've already seen Penn State dabble with him at guard. And Sal Wormley isn't on the roster anymore. There is a competition at that right guard spot. Everyone's already penciled in Cooper Cousins. And he's not on my list because I think there's a given that he is going to be in the lineup this year. But it does not preclude them from playing multiple guards at either position, left or right. And so JB Nelson, I think, has to battle with some of these young guys, 5-star offensive lineman and Alec Burkmeyer. And, of course, Javen Williams, who I want to single out here, is a guy who is super athletic, fits Andy Kotelnicki's scheme really well. I talked to him before last year. He loves getting out and running. He wants to get into space and he wants to hit people. That's what this offense is great at doing, whether it's pulling or, they got really aggressive with the outside zone in the playoff. Those things fit Javen really well. So tackle, guard, I think there's an opportunity for him to finally take that step this spring, but there's a lot of competition for sure.
I think without Donka in there, you kind of got to keep him at tackle. Like, if you want a 2 deep there, it makes sense, and he can continue to learn guard. And I think he's probably more of a natural guard, but just because he never passed block coming before he came to college or before he got to college. So I think that there's that swing element to that, but you feel good about the strides that he made this offseason. Chuck Losey had a couple good things to say about him last week. Some other people in the program have talked about, not I wouldn't call it turning a corner, because you turn the corner and you're still 2 deep, 2 and 3 deep. there. So,
Right.
there's still a long ways to go until you're a game guy. But at the same time, the progress is there, and that's what you're seeing. And credit to those guys for sticking it out, because that in the portal age, not everybody does. So
Yeah.
I'm encouraged by that. But I think you're going to see him at tackle this spring, and then maybe it changes up with the development of Boyer, with Dunca getting healthy as well. It's good to have options that are athletic enough to do both. And I think that's what Penn State has in Javen Williams, and probably starting to see it this year. And that class of, count backwards here, that class
23?
of 2023 is very interesting, because we thought Burkmeyer would be the early impact guy. That has not been the case. We thought Javen Williams, eventually maybe 2025 would be the year that he could step in and be a starter after a couple of years of development. I don't think he's there yet, but I feel fine about their developmental track. And that's kind of a credit to Troutline, kind of credit to the entire room right there.
I just one last thought I just had is he, in a lot of ways, reminded me of Drew Shelton in terms of didn't have a lot of pass blocking experience coming into college, having a similar size skill set for a tackle position. I think it speaks to the way that Phil Trautwein has changed the room, that we have the conversation of there's an option of where Javen Williams can play. Nate doesn't believe in the trenches and doesn't think that you win in the trenches in football, because he has no offensive or defensive lineman in his rundown. So where are we going, skill position boy?
Can I say one thing about Javen?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I wanted you to approve it. They always knew internally, there was never a point for Javen Williams where he was not seen as we can compound interest this guy into somebody in 4 years. That was always the point.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just
you slap the stars on him, and then all of a sudden the expectations go out the window, right?
But the
external expectations. Okay.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that the star wasn't Charles Power, wasn't he as high on him as anybody, with the caveat that he was high on him from the potential standpoint. It was all about what he could be in the future. And I think that you started to see some semblance of that last year, right during the season, towards the end of the season, towards November, where James Franklin was starting to talk about him a little bit, right, and has spoken about him since. And I think Chuck Losey maybe mentioned him the other day. This is okay. This is so stupid.
You're forgetting that people look and don't listen. Like that has been the scouting report. If you listen to people. But if you look and see the 5 stars, you say, "Why isn't this guy starting as 5-star?" It's as simple as it is.
I took my kid to a doctor's appointment yesterday. And Fitz, you know this intimately, right? They have this
no
chart.
idea where you're going intimately.
No, they have a chart, and there's dots on it, right, that represent where your kid is on the trajectory, right? Yeah. Like for height and weight and all that stuff.
Yeah,
like Javen's on it. He's not ahead. He's not behind. He's where he's supposed to be.
That's the first time ever Javen Williams on a growth chart has not been exceedingly ahead
for
in
toddlers.
All of the metrics. So who do you have, Nate? Who's the offensive player that you're interested in?
I mean, I'm totally messing this up, but Grunk and Smolik, I think, are obvious that they just, for a variety of reasons, not least of all because Drew Aller got hurt and missed half of a game at Wisconsin, right? He is not infallible. And so you do need to have a second quarterback who can play and run your offense and win you a game if it comes to that. There should be every expectation in the world that Penn State will have. I mean, they're going to be multi-touchdown favorites in a bunch of games this year.
Yep.
And so there should be lots of opportunity for game experience for some of these guys, or for at least one of these guys as a backup, to get, meaningful game experience. But I think that the necessity of pushing the development process for one of those two guys, either Smolik coming off of an injury that he missed the entire season, or Grunk in year 2, that's real. It's got to happen.
Fitz, am I allowed to now be fully way too early on Ethan Grunkmeyer? Because some of the things that you're saying here, I've been trying not to say for a couple years in terms of there's some things he does better than Drew.
How dare you?
Yeah, well, exactly. And so, like, are we at the point where it's the quarterback of the future conversation? Is that what we're deciding here in this spring, or what's your temperature on the Ethan Grunkemeyer conversation in terms of projecting the future, talent level, etc.?
I mean, from a taking a step back standpoint, Drew coming back, I mean, that's a perfect storm for Gronk, right? You get a chance to sit for another year, develop, and then get yourself into this offense, get yourself into the flow of how things work as a backup or as a traditional backup, because he wasn't a traditional backup. He was a third string guy that was forced into it via injury. Then he was a backup via transfer. So like nothing has been normal in terms of his prep for this. So all of a sudden you've got an opportunity to get in there and get some later reps and things like that. So he's going to need game reps. So I think it sets up perfectly for him. The flip side of Smolik's pretty good. Like they like him a lot. And I don't think it's a situation you don't want to have a backup coming out of spring, because if you have a backup coming out of spring, you probably got 3 quarterbacks, 3 scholarship guys on the roster come fall. So yeah, I think that you continue that battle and you give both those guys those reps. And I think that they're close enough that you legitimately can continue that battle into August. So I think that's where you're standing with that. So I think yes, you're probably jumping ahead. Is it the likely outcome in 2026? Probably, but that's a long way from now. And you never know how those guys are going to process and progress.
So we've still got to get to Fitz's recruiting update in the mailbag. So we got to go through defense a little bit more efficiently. But Fitz,
I'm not that exciting. I've got other guys. I got Kobe Howard. I got the young running backs. I got all these guys that make sense. Nate wants to talk about Tyseer Denmark. I mean,
I do.
There's a lot of opportunity for young guys this spring. I'm sorry if I'm running over time here, but there's a lot of opportunity for these guys, just in the sense of, hey, you know what you're going to get with Nick and Katron, and no Stan Drayton's there, and he's there to make them better. But that's not what this is about. This is about keeping those guys healthy, keeping those guys fresh. And then all of a sudden, you got to figure out Cam Wallace. How much is he going to be able to do? And Quentin Martin and Corey Smith. And all of a sudden, Tyke Hayes comes in, and people are like, "Whoa, this kid's something." So
yeah,
you've got a lot to look for at these position battles. And I always joke about the third tight end, but these position battles down the depth chart, they matter, because in 2 years, or actually in 1 year, with when talking about the running backs, it's really going to matter with your starter.
Yeah, and also we saw at tight end 3, A, had a role in the offense, and B, you had to elevate somebody because of the injury to Andrew Rappelier. So absolutely, these battles matter in spring and then into fall camp. And one of those battles last year was slot receiver, and Caden Saunders presumably was going to be a part of it. Gets injured. Now we have a different dynamic on the offense. I still think they lean towards, hey, there's a lot of slot receivers on this team, and they need to find some guys that can play outside. Devontae Ross might be changing that, but Nate, it seems like that's what you're pointing towards. Caden Saunders, Tyseer Denmark.
I could have thrown 7 names in there. Just figure it out. That's the purpose of the spring, is to figure it out. Yeah, and give yourself, all of the. I can't express properly how jarring it is to see last year's receptions chart and then project it into this year. There are 2 receivers on the roster this year that caught a pass last year.
Liam Clifford and Anthony Ivy. Did Anthony Ivy catch a pass?
Yeah, Ivy caught a pass. Yeah.
Okay.
There's 3 then, because Denmark caught one too. So,
yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to blow up your spot. That's my.
In any case, I was lying for effect. No, in any case, it's still like there's just no returning production. There's 0 returning production.
It's okay. Ivy lost that catch with the Purdue game, so
yeah, it's -1 for the drop.
I don't want to, and I should correct myself. Liam was exactly who he was supposed to be last year. I think 17 catches, 19 whatever it was. Was effectively what he was supposed to be. What, T. Frank? You want to give him more than that? 25 catches?
No. Okay, so
I'm saying in terms of production, if I'm looking at the final stat line, that's what it was supposed to be.
I just always think that his physical ability is more than we give him credit for, and he has not lived up to it. And so I think that there's always this conflict in my mind of he's not that slow. He can be he can be a quality receiver in this offense. Yeah, I had to mitigate the speech there because no, great is not within, but he can be a vertical threat.
That slow.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he's not slow. And in a vertically based offense, I felt like watching him in high school, that's what he would be able to do, is like run vertical routes, posts, seams, go balls. And maybe he's not going to get behind every DB, but you get him matched up, he'll get some catches. And it just hasn't materialized at any point. And so, like, yeah, I think that there's a little bit of disappointment there in me of like, he's a big body dude that should have more contested catches and all those things. And I'm talking way too much about Liam Clifford at this point.
It's just like cut out the conversation that we had last year and the year before that and just splice it in here, because it is the dynamic has not changed. You know who the characters are, you know what they're supposed to bring to the table. Are they going to do it or not? And that's the opportunity that's in front of them and like, that's the thing that I think is important, is to look at this and frame it as an opportunity. It's like somebody can seize it or not. And
I think it's important that Fitz also has Kobe Howard specifically on his list as well, in terms of there's a legit chance, apparently, based on what you think here, that he's going to get a lot of exposure this spring, and that development curve, if you want to accelerate it for a true freshman, somebody who got here in early December. Is that what you're saying, Fitz? Guy who has positional skills that maybe could play, got the time to develop, he could be a factor, is kind of what it leans towards, what seems.
Yeah, I think so. I don't want to jump too far ahead, especially that position. Like, you hear good things on the transfers, you hear good things on some of the guys that are coming back in the freshmen, but like, the proof is on the field. And like, until we get there, like, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but Kobe Howard had some of those skills that we talk about translating, like Tysier Denmark did. But at the same time, probably more athletic, like, than we expected. Then actually, he came in last summer and he ran okay. He ran great. He came in January, ran great. Like, there's a jump there that nobody really saw coming. And I think that's very intriguing. And when you're taking a receiver from South Florida, and he's not Jeremiah Smith, but you're taking a receiver from South Florida who has been at a different level. He's seen things completely different than Lyric Samuel saw things in New York. And even Tysier in Philly and some of these other guys that are coming in. So you've got an edge because of that. And I think that I'm very curious to see how that's going to work out. Now, got to catch the football, got to take care of the football, got to do all the things that a freshman, there's reasons that freshmen don't play, and you got to do those things to get on the field. But like, I think it's been a nice little surprise so far for Kobe Howard. We've been talking about him on BlueWhaleIllustrated.com for a while now, just in terms of like what he can potentially do. I don't know it's going to happen right away, but like, he's got that skill set.
So I do want to get to the defense now. And Nate, you had Max Granville. I wrote down Max Granville and then deleted him. So I think it's an important place to start. Why is this one? I jumped to the top of the list for you.
Sack the quarterback.
Yeah.
They need someone that is going to do that with some level of consistency, even if it's not as an every down kind of guy, but somebody that can be that threat and demand and command that attention. And especially if Nittany is getting additional support right on the other side. Like if teams are going to hedge toward him, who is the beneficiary of that for Penn State, and what kind of results and production can they come up with? I mean, it wasn't an accident with Abdul Carter, right? You could understand, like, he was going to make life very difficult for opposing quarterbacks. Can you do that or not? Can you do that or not? Do they have the players on this team, on this defense, at defensive end, who can get after it and make those splash plays? Because it changes games. And Abdul was proof of that over and over and over again. Is that guy Max? I don't know. Maybe.
I spent the last 2 months obsessing over the Jim Knowles defense and the things they could do this spring. So I want to sit this one out because, again, too many tangents. Fitz, what do you think about? I think this is an important one to talk about. So Max Granville, his potential fit in the two deep this upcoming year. Is he a guy you can scheme around? Is he a guy whose talent, even if it's situationally, you would design pass rushes for him and maybe not for Dennis Sutton?
That's a good follow-up clarification, because you think back to Shaka Toney when he was a redshirt sophomore or something like that. And he could be the situational guy, and he could be the guy that gets out there and maybe plays 15 snaps a game, but is effective and still, and you can work around that. So I think that is a good way to frame it, because I'm curious moving forward, and this is just for maybe spring, maybe just for 2025. Does Jalen Harvey have a potential to have a bigger impact from a first 3 downs basis than Max Granville? And I know the Granville's getting bigger, and I know Granville's strong and everything like that, but Harvey's just a little bit different in terms of his muscle makeup and his ability to.
The pure mass he has is very different than.
Yeah, it kind of more bridges the gap between the speed rusher that we've seen with Chop and AK and Abdul, and the power guy on the other side in Nittany and some of those other guys that have been through here. So I'm very curious to see how that happens. I think both can be effective to an extent as redshirt freshmen, but at the same time, they're very talented kids, and I'm curious to see just how much they get from a down-to-down basis from Granville versus Harvey, how much they play Zariah Fisher this spring, because he needs reps, but at the same time, he needs to be healthy more than he needs reps. So I have no idea how they're going to balance all that, and it's going to benefit those two. It's going to benefit Malachi Williams. It's going to benefit those young guys. But you got to find somebody, and Nia White even, you got to find somebody that can step up into that 2 deep and fill in those reps when Deni's not out there.
It'll also matter how they play that front, because I wrote about this offseason, the part I don't want to get too deep on, but if they play a difference of positions, a jack defensive end and a base defensive end, or if they just play defensive end like they did like Knowles did at Ohio State, will determine who's playing those positions, and the 2 deep will be different. Or do they play the 2 best defensive ends? That is a big part of this conversation. So, Nate, you and I have linebacker, and you have Keon Wiley. I have Tamir Robinson. Mm-hmm. So, kind of the same question with Zariah Fisher. Can you get Keon Wiley through spring practice? Or is he going to be a guy who's out there a lot, given his injury history? And I don't want that to be an unfair question, but also it is a thing that's in the story of Keon Wiley. So why specifically do you have Wiley here?
Because he was on a trajectory to be a big part of the conversation last year, right? I mean, some of these guys, like, it's easy to be out of sight, out of mind, and I think that's what happens quite a bit, but guys who have shown value and remain in the program should be seen as a barometer of what their potential value is moving forward, right? If it was this guy's just made of glass, like, it's not. There aren't, and I'm not going to say that there aren't feel-good stories, right? Or that there aren't, but it's not, this isn't charity at this point, right? And so guys who have been through it and don't have the makeup to get through it and come out on the other side and be a better version of themselves, or somebody who can provide value, they don't stay in the program. There's no spot for them. There is for Keon Wiley. There is for Zariah Fisher, right? There is for some of these guys who just hasn't connected, right? All the dots haven't come together in the way that they would have anticipated or liked or hoped. But Penn State still sees something in them that keeps them in the program, and that positions them to, at minimum, compete to make a big impact in the season ahead.
I guess to follow on the back end of that, the 2 guys that did play last year, Anthony Specca, Tamir Robinson, they used them interchangeably. But Tamir, when the 2 were on the field, was more often the Mike linebacker. And if we're talking about the position they need to find depth for, and they need to find somebody to fill, a 6'4", 6'3", whatever he is, his wingspan is that of like a 7-foot player. Tamir Robinson has a lot of potential. He has a lot of ability, but the mental side of it has been slow to come for him. So getting a lot of reps right now in spring, learning the defense, plowing all of that into a guy that you think maybe could be the next guy, and fending off other players, fending off other guys. Kari Jackson is in the chat. Alex Tash is a freshman. I wouldn't expect that to be a part of the conversation just yet. But Tamir Robinson, it is a pressure situation in terms of, I think this is a big spring for him to make sure he maintains where he is on that seniority chart. And also, I think he'll have the opportunity because right now there is one position I feel like on the entire roster where we don't know generally who's going to be there. We talk about defensive end. We have a depth chart, a number of names. Receiver, it's wide open, but we know the names that are involved. I don't have a good feel about Mike linebacker in terms of the names that are going to shake out in the final iteration of the depth chart at this point, which I think is what spring is for. Fitz?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that more this week on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So, nice.
I like that preview. And of course, to tie it all in, join us for $1. Spring football is just around the corner. You're going to want the intel because here's the other thing about spring football. We're having these conversations, but we get 10 minutes of practice a week. What we're talking about is going to happen behind closed doors, and our reporting, our sourcing, these guys here on the show, nobody does it better to get you what's going on during spring football. And that happens at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com in our premium articles, trimmings, the buzz, all that stuff that happens during spring football. These guys have it, and you got to sign up at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com to go get that. Okay. Fitz, you got the D-line. Can you wrap us up here on the defense before we get into whatever we have left in the 10 minutes we've got left?
Yes, I have 5 defensive linemen listed, or defensive tackles listed here, just because that's the nature of the position and where Penn State sits, with Alonzo Ford on the shelf, with Zane Durant hopefully getting the veterans treatment this spring. So you got Xavier Gilliam, you got Ty Blanding, who I think are kind of we're going to put them in a tier. And then you've got the redshirt freshmen that come behind them in Liam Andrews, DeAndre Cook, Owen Wafel, that are in a separate tier. Caleb Artis was banged up at the end of last year, so I'm curious to see how or if he fits in there. But you got a lot of talented bodies there, but they're not ready for Big Ten play. There's a long way between here and August, and they've got a lot of development to do. I'm probably most curious to see where Penn State stands in terms of, do you see enough of these guys in spring, or do you see enough out of these guys in spring to determine what you do in the portal in the spring window? Because they're going to look at defensive tackles, they're going to look at defensive ends, they're going to look at a bunch of positions. I know the chat needs 3 more wideouts or whatever, but you're going to look at this position group and say, I think they're talented enough to follow the plan that we have at Penn State, which is develop our own guys and figure out what they do and work around them. Defensive tackles, as we saw in the winter window, very expensive and not sure things, certainly. So you've got a bridge to cross in mid to late April, and I'm curious to see how that works. Do you see enough from guys like Blanding, who has flashed, but maybe the consistency isn't there? Xavier Gilliam looks great, but
he looks great. Yeah,
but you got to take. That's a big step to take. It's one thing to play in 4 games and mop up duty and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, all of a sudden he's going to be asked to play 40 snaps in a game next year. It's going to be very, very different for him. So how does that work when he makes that jump? We saw the same thing with Zane Durant. It's like Zane had all that potential, and then you've got to put him in a situational role to start and then sort of roll. It's sort of a rollout there. So all these guys have that kind of potential. DeAndre Cook has done some really nice things. I think his growth chart, as we referenced something earlier in the show, is probably a little bit ahead of schedule. But does that mean that he's going to be a part of the rotation in 2025? I don't know. There's a ton of questions there. Liam Andrews obviously coming off the injury. Owen Wafel's done some nice things since he was there, but then again, he didn't play as a freshman at Michigan. So many questions with this group, a lot of talent, but I feel pretty good about where the room stands for 2026. But there's that pesky season before that is a pretty big season for Penn State in 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one where there's going to be some decisions along the defense that are going to determine a lot of what happens during that season. And luckily, they've got a lot of time, including most of September, before they get to games that are going to decide all of that. We don't have any more time. It is now time for the BWI mailbag. We got to get to your questions here in the chat, and of course from the Blue White Illustrated message board. Fitz, we're going to figure out if we're doing Fitz's recruiting update today, tomorrow, never this week. We'll figure that out in a bit, but we're going to get to the mailbag right now. Of course, the chat is always open for your questions and comments. We've been putting them for the people listening on the podcast version. We've been putting people's thoughts and opinions here on the channel. We have so much to get to. We had this pent up energy from a week of not having a conversation about football that we didn't get to all of the comments in the chat. But if you've got some questions or you want to put something in the chat that maybe you said earlier and I just missed it because of all the things that were going on, throw it in the chat right now and we'll get to that here in the mailbag. But Fitz, I'm going to start with you. There's a lot of recruiting here in the chat today. Ear to the Ground wants to know, what's the difference between a visit and an official visit? The only thing he knows is that schools pay for travel expenses on an official visit. What are the tactile differences or the important differences to you and what you've learned about the difference between the two visits?
There's actually not a ton, like the travel expenses and the food and all the stuff that can be paid for, sort of the wining and dining experience rather than the researching experience. And the researching is part of the official visit as well. But like you can get a lot. And so we'll take Alex Haskell for an example here. He's going to take 4 unofficial visits before, not necessarily before the official visit window, but like in the spring rather than going on official visits in the summer, where you can do all the research you need to. You can sit in on meetings, you can sit in with the coaches and see how they're going to use you and all that stuff. He's just going to have to pay for it. Like that's going to be how that works. Whereas the official visit has become this sort of weekend extravaganza where you get flown in, or some guys get driven, car service and stuff like that. You stay at the hotel. You can pay for parents now, which 10 years ago, I think that was not the case, which changes a lot of things. And it really helps Penn State, given its accessibility and how expensive it is to get to fly into Penn State or into State College. So like, that's really the main difference. And it's more structured because you've got 10 or 15 guys that are coming in and doing essentially the same thing. But I still think there's value in both. And there's really a lot that you can take out of those. And honestly, I think it's probably guys get caught up in the process. And I don't think that's a bad thing or a good thing, but they think the official visits are everything. And that's a dangerous way of thinking. You've got guys that are like, I'm not going to do anything until the summer. And it's really tough because a lot can happen in that time frame. You could lose a spot, you could do all that kind of stuff. But I think guys get so caught up in what's going on in the process, what's going on in other people's process, they make it their own. So for example, last year at this time, we're talking about in March and April, talking about setting up official visits. Well, that started in another month and a half, 2 months earlier this year. So all of a sudden you get all these guys that's what they think they're supposed to do, is set up official visits in February. Whereas that's 4 months away. Like June is 4 months away. So I think that is what we see in this era of college football recruiting, is that the official visits are trumping everything. And I don't necessarily know that that's the best way to make a decision, because you're seeing the best of everything. And that's not what you see on a daily basis in a college football program. Like you're not going to eat steak and lobster every day. Like you're going to figure out these different ways to get around and do campus life and things like that. So I think that these spring visits are valuable and probably being undersold by some of these recruits. Like they're not paying attention to the spring visits and the unofficial visits and all the information that they could digest, because they're looking so far ahead to the official visits. So that's kind of my rant on the question that was, I mean, maybe not even answered, but that is the main difference right there. Is that's the wine and dine and all that other stuff that comes along with it. Whereas the unofficial, you probably get more out of it. Like that was Peter Bork, I believe, that is coming for an unofficial visit for a practice, and people wanted to know why he wasn't coming for the blue-white game. Well, you can see more at a practice. You can see more of the personality of the coaches. You can see more of the body language of the quarterbacks, for example, for his position, for the quarterbacks. You can get in the meeting room and sit down and break down practice tape. Whereas you're coming in for the blue-white game and it's a great experience, great atmosphere. You love to see however many thousands of people are there, but you're probably not getting it from a research standpoint, from an informational digestion standpoint. So it's just been a very interesting curve with these summer officials, because I think that's really all these kids think that they need to know. And it's tough to get around that.
Yeah. How does it make me feel? Not what's the information I need to gather. Nate, I'm going to come to you with this one, which is about Danny O'Brien. Lamgul asks, is Franklin's trust in Danny O'Brien the riskiest gamble in his career? On the one hand, Danny O'Brien doesn't have any quarterback coaching, development, and experience before joining Penn State as a GA. On the other, he seems to be a young rising star in the coaching ranks. He went on to say in the comment, essentially 24-25, this is a very pivotal year for Penn State's national championship hopes. this run that they went on last year that they might continue this year? Is he the guy to develop quarterbacks? What's your view? What's your sourced understanding of these things?
I'm having a hard time contextualizing it in terms of like career gambles, like other gambles.
Let's just simplify. Do you think it is a risk to have Danny O'Brien as the quarterback's coach, to elevate him to that position where he is responsible for developing quarterbacks, where previously he was the offensive coordinator? You know, you had guys who had track records of other schools' production from their offense, usually took on the quarterback, and that was how that worked. Now it's a guy who was GA and is now elevated to that position. Do you think that is a risk, just in its own conversation point?
What was Drew when he got to Penn State? 5-star, I get it. I understand. Like there were high expectations, sure, but I think we know better in the sense that he was an unpolished piece of potential, right? To be molded. Danny O'Brien has been his quarterback coach for the duration of his career, and Drew Aller is, being generous, a top 5 pick next year in the draft. Yeah. Being even conservative, not right, but like first round, no matter what.
Yeah. Well, Nate, to put it into a little more specific context, he is also, and this is not our opinion, this is national opinion, one of the top 10 quarterbacks returning in college football. So specifically to the plan of getting to a national championship, I agree with you in terms of the talent and the potential and all those things being important in his long-term development. But in the Penn State lens of fans that care about their team winning a national championship, you can't throw a stone this offseason without hitting a list with him in the top 5 or 10 of returning quarterbacks with experience and talent in college football.
And I am simply saying that he is a product of Danny O'Brien's tutelage. And so if that's the trajectory, like that's the proof. right. Like Drew Aller is the proof. And I'm not saying that it's just Danny O'Brien. I mean, I do think that we focus so much on individuals when this is a sport that is the definition of it takes a village. Brad Mendler is right in there, right? Like Andy Kotelnicki, James Franklin, right? There are voices that are in the process of Drew Aller that have helped make him what he has become, including, not least of all, Drew Aller, right? Like following through and having the work ethic to become that guy. But I just think in terms of, if the question is, right, is the trust in Danny O'Brien the riskiest gamble in Franklin's career, isn't pulling in an outside voice at this point of his career more of a gamble? Wouldn't that, like, to me, I would see a change in something that has been steady and purposeful and meaningful and demonstrable. I would see that as being a bigger gamble, a bigger risk. So no, I don't agree with the premise, especially in the context of taking bits and pieces of something that you wanted me to ask Franklin last year in our offseason interview, our July interview or June interview, where James basically said, everyone comes from somewhere. Like everyone starts somewhere, right? Phil Troutwine was not like the most sought after dude in the world when Penn State picked him up, right? Terry Smith came from high school, right? Like
Temple, but yeah,
Temple. Okay,
you had to stop in Temple, but I mean, Ty Howell was a directional Illinois coordinator and came on as an analyst and got bumped up. Deion Barnes was a GA here, so not all that different than Danny O'Brien, with the exception that Danny O'Brien works in the most important position on the field. So that stuff, for my money, the most risky gamble in Franklin's career, Joe Moorhead in 2016, just happened to work. So like we think about where the program was beforehand, and taking a step back and letting him be the head coach of the offense. I think that was the riskiest gamble. And it just, like I said, when it works, we look back and say, oh, that made sense.
Turning point.
That made total no. Well, it's just that made sense. You got this guy, and he was always this guy. Well, Joe was the head coach of Fordham and very successful, but at the same time, that's not a sure thing. So I think that's what I'm looking at with the riskiest thing. They had Danny for years. James and Danny go way back, and not in the sense that like they're buddy, but like James knows his makeup and knows his football IQ, his actual football IQ. This isn't a situation where sometimes you can interview guys and they can fake it and make it and keep climbing, and eventually, it's going to burn out on them. We saw that with former Penn State assistant. So it's very interesting to look at this and say they see enough in him to make him this position before he was able, or before he could get away, because we have talked about several coaches like that maybe the timing wasn't right, and then all of a sudden they go elsewhere and they become really good coaches. So I think that's kind of what I'm looking at here. But yeah, I mean, it's a vital move, absolutely, but a risky one. I wouldn't put it up on that pantheon with something like Moorhead.
Originally from Neutron, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I want to get to a couple things here in the chat. I asked for the questions, and it would be rude of me to then ignore them. Originally from Neutron says, will Luke Reynolds make Penn State forget about Tyler Warren? I think Luke Reynolds has a ton of potential, and from a physical ability, he's faster than Tyler Warren. Is it all going to happen this year? Is it all good? I guess that's my question, Nate, to you. Is that too much of an accelerated timeline for sophomore Luke Reynolds to make Penn State fans forget about Tyler Warren? There's no timeline on this question, so take whatever timeline you want.
I think it's underrated how many difficult catches that Tyler Warren made last season, and those ball skills are not repeatable necessarily right off the bat. I just like, he was exceptional at that. Of all the stuff that Tyler Warren did, and Tyler Warren did a ton of stuff, but the amount of time, right? And I'm just ballparking here, but if I went back and looked at best catch for 16 games, I would bet that Tyler Warren, and granted, he had a ton of opportunities to make those catches, but also of anybody that Drew Aller was throwing the ball to last year, he's the only one that bailed him out.
I think too, just to give originally from Neutron a bonus point here, the only other one I could think of is Luke Reynolds going up on a Bo Perbula pass late in, I don't remember what game it was, early in the season when he came in. He had a really good contested catch, and that is something that Luke Reynolds does pretty well. So I agree with you in terms of you can't be 100% sure or replicate all of that all at once. But the good thing is Luke Reynolds has got a lot of those traits. David Greeter, Fitz, you're our grill master here. Better summer grill food, barbecue chicken or cheeseburgers?
Smash burgers.
Smash burgers. What's the difference with you? What's the difference there?
You just smash it on the patty, and it comes out thinner, so like it cooks differently. And sometimes you get meatballs and served in a burger form. I like the flat patty. Double them up, throw some cheese on them, throw some sauce on them. That's the way I go. But do love me some chicken. I just love grilling. It's one of the favorite pastimes as one would expect with just looking at me. So
I love the skin on chicken, like that crispy. If you're doing chicken breasts, like I don't know why you would put that in a food category with burgers for grilling, but you can do a chicken thigh, you can do drumstick, get a little crisp on there, barbecue. I hope that's where David's going with that question. Any final thoughts? I know we're a little bit over time. We got some place that we all have to be collectively, but Nate, what are you working on this week at bluewhiteillustrated.com? Get us out of here. Tell us what people can sign up for to read later today or later this week.
I'm offended that I wasn't asked. Flank steak is the correct answer. Marinated for 24 hours. Yeah, thank you.
Fancy guy.
You got to pat it dry, though, guys. It's really important to not have liquid on top. What am I working on? Continuing to preview spring practice, which is fast approaching, and we'll have insight throughout. So kick it to Fitz.
All right, Fitz, same question.
Lots of stuff. We talked yesterday about guys with vital springs in the offense. We'll bring up the defense as well. We've got a bunch of recruiting sort of ramping back up. And like I said, I know you guys are kind of fatigued with official visits, but we're going to start getting guys on campus and actually having some movement there. We missed the recruiting update this week, but honestly, like it's better served for Thursday. There's a lot to talk about, but not a lot of happenings on Penn State side, if that makes sense. So we'll talk about more of that on Thursday. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the site, tell 10 friends to subscribe to the site, just the regular stuff. So check us out, blueillustrated.com.
He said it better than I could, so we'll talk to you tomorrow. Greg and I are back to do more spring football conversations, some of the things we've been thinking about, writing about at blueillustrated.com. We'll talk to you then.